57 years ago this weekend, civil rights leaders, including 25-year-old John Lewis, led marches across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama to demand Black Americans' right to vote. They were met with brutal attacks by Alabama state troopers. Footage of the onslaught shocked the country and helped galvanize the fight for equality. This weekend, activists, civil rights leaders, and Vice President Kamala Harris will honor the foot soldiers of Bloody Sunday by linking arms in a walk across the historic bridge. But this year's commemoration of Bloody Sunday falls against the backdrop of voter suppression efforts that echoed those of 1965. Lawmakers in 19 states have enacted 37 laws restricting access to the ballot box since last year, with 250 more pending in state houses across the country. With the gains of 1965 in jeopardy, marchers this year will cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge once again, demanding Congress protect the right to vote. Joining me now, one of the civil rights titans of today who will be marching in Selma on Sunday, Bishop William Barber, President and Senior Lecturer of Repairs of the Breach and co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign. Reverend Barber, as we mentioned, this march takes place against this backdrop of a tidal wave of voter suppression laws, including a recent Supreme Court decision that reinstates the congressional map right there in Alabama that dilutes the voting power of Black people in that state. How crucial is this moment that this march is taking place?
Charles, it is in a crisis of civilization and democracy, which is why we cannot merely have a nostalgic gathering. Even a commemoration is not big enough. We have to have a recommitment. And that's why we're marching across the bridge, but then we're going to continue to march to Montgomery. Then there's going to be a massive gathering the weekend of the assassination of Dr. King in West Virginia, led by minors and Black people. And then we are mobilizing towards a mass poor people's low-wage workers assembly and moral march on Washington and to the polls June 18, 2022. I'm here, Charles, thinking about this, and I'm probably going to say something might get in a little trouble, but I think, and some of us are going to do this on Sunday, we need to go to that bridge first and repent. All of us, every civil rights organization, every group, for what we have not done since 2013. This didn't start with Trump, it didn't start with Manchin, it started in 2013. And we got to really ask ourselves, after 2013, did we do everything we could have, put our bodies on the line, go to the courts to fight? Did we demand that this issue be center place in every election since 2014? And the answer is no. I know in North Carolina, we had 1,200 people got arrested. We fought. We went to court. We fought against $6 million of state money fighting. It took us 4 years to win. But we can't just keep saying this is Trump. We got to also own our place. There's a scripture in the Bible where Isaiah says, I'm a sinner and I live in the midst of people unclean. We got to repent. And we got to recapture the spirit. You say the backdrop in 65 was against the president who said he wasn't going to do something. It was after they lost the provision for voting in the Civil Rights Act of 64. They were in a similar position. But what did they do? They chose to put it all on the line. They chose not to even wait till an election year, because 65 wasn't an election year. They chose to change the context that the politicians had to exist in. And then lastly, we've got to reframe this from just being a special interest of Black people to really being about racism and classism, about voting rights connected to denial of economic justice, and work to bring all people in this fight. Because right now, if these laws hold, 55 million or to 6 million Americans will not have access to the polls that they had in 2020. So I'm coming to repent and invite others, because we have not done everything we should have been doing in the movement, and still aren't, I don't believe, to dramatize how serious this issue is.
On the policy side, what do you see the path forward for the federal legislation to step in and help to block some of this? The courts just don't move fast enough, and the states are moving very fast to enact these laws.
Yeah. Well, number one, I was taught in parliamentary procedures, Charles, that when you put an amendment on the floor and you lose, then you call for the question. So since Manchin and Sinema's so-called amendment lost, we should call for the question. The original uh, John Lewis For the People's Act, that's what the president and others should be pushing if they're serious. Don't tell us it can't be done. We can't allow Manchin to change the conversation and change the policy. And then we should put everything we have behind that to say we want a For the People's Act, and we want a true voting rights act restoration that has a formula that guarantees states are going to be covered. Because right now, what they put before us, if you look real close at that bill, it would restore the Voting Rights Act, but most states would not be covered under preclearance. Charles, most of them would not. So we don't need bills that say something that really don't do all that needs to be done. So I'm saying we should call for a reset on two things, and that is the For the People's Act. That's what John Lewis put out there. That's what Manchin co-signed on. We should push that. I know what the movement should do. And we should push for a full Voter Restoration Act. And we should connect that to the living wage fight. And then if they don't do it, use that to mobilize people to the polls in 2020 and go after these 5 Senate seats that then would give us the kind of leverage we need in the Senate to push the policies that we need, connect the dots, and demand real change.
The president took 2 or 3 lines in the State of the Union address to urge Congress to pass these pieces of voting rights legislation. But, to be honest, since these 2 bills failed on January 19th, he hadn't said very much about it. The conversation about voting rights basically dried up in D.C. Do you think that the march on Sunday and the actions that you're going to take after that march are going to reignite a conversation around voting rights and re-engage Schumer, who has to figure out a time in the calendar to put it on the floor, or the White House, or both?
I think it must. And I think that let's add to that the Black Caucus. Let's add that to every Democrat that's running for office this fall. There should be centerpiece on all the people running for Senate, for the House. This should be right up there together. Voting rights and economic justice ought to be centerfold. And so the president didn't say enough, but more should be said. Is more being required to be said? Is the caucus requiring more? And not just what's being said, are we willing to demand that these pieces be centerpiece? So we must do this Sunday and beyond. What we have to do is make sure to remember that transformation policy always comes up from the bottom up, not from the top down. And then lastly, Charles, none of this is going to happen. And this is something the Poor People's Campaign is trying to tell people understand from the data. Unless we have a massive mobilization and we recognize that poor and low wealth voters, particularly those who have not voted, are the only block of voters that can fundamentally move us where we need to be. It's the fear of they are the fear of the moderates. They are the fear of the extremists. We need to be mobilizing them, poor and low wealth voters who make up 33% of the electorate, and in a state like Alabama, over 40% of the electorate, and most of them don't vote. And not that they're voting for Trump, they don't because they never hear either party really address them. The key to all of this is what Dr. King said at the end of the Selma to Montgomery March. He said that the great fear of the aristocracy in this country were the masses of poor Black people and white people joining together to create a political power block that could change the economic architecture of this country. If any party is not working to mobilize poor and low wealth people in this country to vote for their agenda, if they're not serious about that, they are not serious about real policy change. All they want is window dressing. If you want serious change, you cannot leave the 140 million poor and low wealth people in this country out of the conversation, and those folk that represent 33% of the electorate. And Charles, in states where the percentage between who got elected for president, the margin was 3%, poor and low wealth people represent 45% of the electorate. So if we're serious, you've got to mobilize. And right now, neither party's doing that. They're talking middle class and the wealthy, but not talking to the 43% of this nation. We're going to make sure we change that.
Bishop Barber, thank you for your time tonight, and I will see you in Selma on Sunday.